Yuri. Today, we're catching up with Yuri Horwitz, CEO of Sol Systems. Yuri, I just read your article on the impacts of COVID on the solar industry. Had a couple questions for you. Of the impacts that we evaluated of COVID on the solar industry, which do you see as being more temporary and which do you think may be more permanent and long-lasting?
That's a great question. Well, we talk a lot about how the markets are reacting, and so within the context of those observations, I would say that I think that the tax equity market we're really concerned about. We, as you know, since you helped do it, we provide tax equity to the industry on behalf of institutional bank and corporate clients, and proud that we've built that platform. I do think that given the environment and the fact that we've sort of all come to an understanding this is not going to be a V-shaped recovery where everything becomes roses within 2 or 3 months, we can expect that a lot of corporations, a lot of banks are going to feel the pain from a profitability perspective, not just for the next 2 or 3 months or 4 or 5 months, but probably for the next 2 or 3 years. And that's going to impact the market in ways that I think we still don't fully understand.
So based on that assessment, do you have a greater concern for tax equity over, say, debt for solar projects?
I do have more confidence in debt and recovery. I do think that one of the aspects of solar is that it is the most stable renewable energy asset that we know of at this point in terms of performance, more stable than wind and more predictable than wind and also hydro. And thus it demands a lower cost of capital. And frankly, it's a great thing to invest in, not just as an investor, but also as a bank. And so I think these are really attractive assets for banks. It is a period of instability and transition. I think we're coming out of that period, but I do believe that banks will re-enter this market with a demand for these assets, especially in light of the fact that the rest of the market right now is going through its own transitions, and frankly, it's a difficult time.
Yep, important to remember that. Do you see some sectors in the solar industry, resi, C&I versus utility, being better or worse off?
I mean, so we in our article, we write a lot about how the market is impacting the solar industry, and we focus on those forces. But there was obviously a lot of health issues and construction issues and equipment issues that have to be worked out. And so to touch on this briefly, I think it's going to be really hard for a lot of residential suppliers to get on top of a roof and build resi for a bit. And I think we're seeing that. My sense is we're going to figure this out. How do we interact with one another in a way that makes us all comfortable? If you're talking about from an equipment perspective, there's some limitations right now with China on transformer equipment. That's going to impact utility scale. But in general, I think that's going to work itself out. On the financing side, if you think about where the markets are going, they're really focused. If you think about risk as a sphere, a three-dimensional sphere, and directionally can go out based on the length of the contract, the risk of the counterparty, the complexity of the asset. I think investors are going to really navigate towards the least risky. And some of the least risky assets are some large utility assets, and some of the more risky assets are some of the community solar assets, some of the development assets, et cetera. And so if you're in the industry right now and you're working on those riskier assets, it's not that you should stop working on them. Actually, you're building value for the rest of the industry by exploring the periphery of where investors and customers can go, and that's important. But you should understand that there's going to be a transition right now, and it's going to be challenging for some investors to get their arms around that. And so you should just be very active communication.
Great. Thanks, Yuri. Last question for you. What does this period we're in and COVID generally mean for the broader clean energy transition, zooming out just from the solar industry specifically?
I don't think that book has been written yet. I can tell you what I hope it means. I think that COVID reminds us that long-term societal decisions that require complex adjustments are incredibly hard to make. And the United States took a long time and is still taking a long time to adjust to this new reality. And climate change falls squarely in that bucket. It's a long-term, complex societal change we're really having trouble navigating, in part because the benefits or the costs are hard to understand, hard to measure, and aren't in the present. So while it might be fun to go out and drink beers in a bar right now, we still don't understand the cost of that. We won't until probably the fall when COVID likely comes back, and we don't even know that, but we think similar with climate, I think that's true. And so my hope is that this reacquaints the human brain, which is used to like very short-term, very simple, so what you might call cost-benefit analysis, with something that's a little more complex. And as policymakers, we're really going to rely on folks to do that, and recognize that, listen, the earth is changing, society is changing. We need to make decisions that drive investment and market recovery and economic investment towards the type of place we want to live in, the type of society we want to build. And for me, that's a society that's more resilient, that relies on human capital here in the United States, and that has less of a burden on the natural environments we all live in. And I think most of the people in the industry believe the same. I know you do, Jesse. And so that's my hope, is that that's where we go. Where we ultimately go is in large part probably going to be a function of what happens in November.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Yuri. I appreciate your insights. Thanks for catching up.
Thanks, Jesse. Take care.